Let there be no hope for informers, and may all wickedness instantly perish. May all the enemies of your people be swiftly cut off, and may you quickly uproot, crush, rout, and subdue the insolent speedily in our days. Blessed are you, Hashem, crusher of enemies and subduer of the insolent. At first glance, this might be the most enigmatic part of our daily prayers. Our asks so far are by and large positive: forgiveness, redemption, healing, prosperity. Then we come to the blessing against enemies, which seems almost vindictive. Adding to the confusion, we call the Amidah, the Shemoneh Esrei, the 18 blessings. But what if we count them and we see there's 19? So what's going on here? The Talmud explains that originally there were 18 blessings, and the blessing against the enemies was added in Yavne, the city in Israel that served as the intellectual center that enabled Judaism to survive following the 70 CE destruction of the Jerusalem temple. However, we kept the number 18 in the name because of the significance it previously held. We learn, Rabbi Levi said, according to Rabbi Hillel, son of Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, who said that the 18 blessings correspond to the 18 mentions of God's name that King David said in the Psalm, the 19th blessing corresponds to a reference to God in the Psalm, where a name other than the Tetragrammaton was used, the God of glory thunders, Psalms 29:3. According to Rav Yosef, who said that the 18 blessings correspond to the 18 mentions of God's name in Shema, the additional blessing corresponds to the word one that is in Shema, Echad. Although it is not the Tetragrammaton, it expresses the essence of faith in God and God's unity. According to what Rabbi Tanchum said, that Rabbi Hoshua ben Levi said, that the 18 blessings correspond to the 18 vertebrae in the spine, the additional blessing corresponds to the small vertebra that is at the bottom of the spine. Still, that leaves us with the question of why the rabbis added this peculiar 19th blessing. The same Talmud page goes on to explain that during this transformative Yavne period, the blessing was needed to separate rabbinic Judaism from the Judaism of the Sadducees, the sect that had control over the temple, but did not accept the traditions of the rabbis. We're told, the sages taught Shimon HaPakuli arranged the 18 blessings, already extant, during the period of the Great Assembly, before Rabban Gamliel, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, in order in Yavne. Due to prevailing circumstances, there was a need to institute a new bracha directed against the heretics. Rabban Gamliel said to the sages, is there any person who knows to institute the blessing of the heretics, a blessing directed against the Sadducees? Shmuel HaKatan, who was one of the most pious men of the generation, stood and instituted it. History indicates that the Sadducees were likely not the only group polemicized against in this blessing. The Talmud tends to make very little mention of Christianity, but a prayer book recovered from a geniza, a place for preserving holy books that can no longer be used, indicates that people have also made mention of the Nazarenes, Jewish followers of Jesus of Nazareth. It reads, for those doomed to destruction, may there be no hope, and may the dominion of arrogance be quickly uprooted in our days. And may the Nazarenes and the heretics be destroyed in a moment, and may they be blotted out of the book of life, and may they not be inscribed with the righteous. Blessed are you, O Lord, who subdues the arrogant. The larger point is that in temple times, and shortly thereafter, there were many schools of thought competing to be the dominant form of Judaism, and in some ways, Jews are more unified today than we were 2,000 years ago. This is because almost all forms of Judaism today trace back to the rabbis of the Talmud. In the chaotic times long ago, the rabbis had to decide who was in and who was out. This is something that today we're often averse to, and for good reason. However, when the Yavne community was establishing Judaism as we know it, it had to make clear what Judaism was in order for it to survive. And I think the rabbis always knew this was a difficult decision to make. I'm fascinated by how the Talmud passage says this bracha was instituted by Shmuel HaKatan. Mainly when I think of Shmuel HaKatan, I think of his saying in Pirkei Avot, if your enemy falls, do not exult. If he trips, let your heart not rejoice, lest the Lord see it and be displeased and avert God's wrath from him. This is derived from the older wisdom in Proverbs and Mishlei. If your enemies fall, do not exult. If they trip, let your heart not rejoice. The Chafetz Chaim in his work Shmirat HaLashon taught that rejoicing in the downfall of an enemy is among the worst infractions a person can commit. He repeated the story told in the Midrash, Lamentations Rabbah. At the time of the destruction of the temple, when our father Avraham went into the temple, and the Holy One be blessed, asked him, what does my loved one in my house? He asked, why have my sons been exiled among the peoples of the world? And the Holy One be blessed answered, because they serve idols and rejoice in each other's downfall. HaKadosh Baruch Hu equating this second sin with that of idolatry. Let a man then always reflect within himself that in view of his sins and his faults, he too deserves to be demeaned and shamed, if not for the Lord's pitying him in the merit of his fathers. This should leave us with a sense of tension. If rejoicing in the downfall of others is so bad, why are we praying for the destruction of enemies? To complicate things even further, it's amazing to me that it's the very same Shmuel HaKatan who in Pirkei Avot exhorts us not to rejoice in the suffering of enemies, and according to the Talmud, institutes the blessing against enemies. The same sage who says we need to take a stand against evil, who also tells us that we need to exercise restraint and not celebrate our enemy's downfall. We learn that, even though we want goodness to win in the world, there's nothing celebratory about this victory. And although we want to be tolerant and accepting of multiple views, we need to still set boundaries. Even today, it's an important spiritual project for all of us to figure out what those boundaries and values are, to evaluate who is a risk to our community and who is not, and to determine what we're fighting for and what we need to take a stand against. Part of this blessing is asking for divine intervention, but part of it is reinforcing our commitment to standing for truth and goodness. When we look at the text of the blessing, we see it identifies three different kinds of enemies: Malshinim, informers; Risha, wickedness; and Oyevecha, God's enemies. The first category, Malshinim, refers to slanderers. Historically, these slanderers would go to the unfriendly outside authorities and turn in Jews, which would destroy people's lives and families. Risha refers to evil actions, and Oyevecha are those who set themselves against God by doing evil on purpose. In our day, we want to distinguish between wicked people and theological heretics. In modernity, when most people are not deeply engaged in religious controversies, we accept that most people with views we disagree with are not necessarily haters of God, but people we believe are simply miseducated. Rather than being dismissive of those who disagree, we need to take the time to engage them at times. Many of our blessings so far have been about the future, such as the restoration of judges, the coming of redemption. This bracha, though, is about right now. The ancient rabbis saw enemies as an immediate threat to our survival, both physical and spiritual. We just davened for justice, but then we see that the rabbis needed to make its own specific category here. It's one thing to have justice in one generation, but the continuation of Judaism across many generations is almost a different level of concern. Still, almost 2 millennia removed from Yavneh, most of us find that this blessing needs to speak to us in a different way than its original context. I had a teacher once in Jerusalem who would take this blessing as a moment to examine his own religious life, imagining himself as saying, God, if I'm the one who's perverting Torah, then stop me. There's an integrity to that. If the problem is in me, then please stop me. In addition to praying for truth and unity and a communal level, we ask God to uproot the problems within us, enabling us to take difficult moral stands within as well as without. As we repair our communities, we also need God's help to repair ourselves. And when we're critical of ourselves, we're reminded to be kind and gentle as we set expectations for others. At the same time, when we ask more of ourselves, we're more equipped to inspire others to follow. And so, I think we'd be lying if we were to say that we don't experience complicated feelings when contemplating this bracha. However, by examining it from its origins up through today, we see how its initial handling of theological and societal tensions has unfolded into something bigger, into a reminder of our duty to be firm in deciding who we are to be as Jews, while also looking inward to use the blessing as a source of humility and growth. The complexity of this blessing is the beauty of it. Have a beautiful day.